welcome to this ET Now special. Today we're going to discuss the Indo-US relations with John Chambers. Thank you for joining us here on ET Now.
It's a pleasure.
Welcome back to India.
Thank you.
You've been one of the early bulls when it comes to the Indian economy and as far as the Narendra Modi government goes. Are you still a bull?
I'm not only still a bull, I think you haven't seen anything yet. I think what the economy has done over the last 3 years has been the role model for the rest of the world. I think your Prime Minister has taken a vision and strategy and put it into execution at a speed that people did not think was possible, and changed the image of India in terms of being a very slow follower to a fast innovator. And it's fascinating to me that now people are saying, are we moving too fast with areas such as demonetization and a goods and services tax? And the answer is no, not at all. Both of them are the foundation for a strong economy of the future. Without a goods and services tax, you will never be a manufacturing machine. You can't have different rules across each of the states. And so I'm more bullish on India than I ever have been before. And today's topic about the US-India Strategic Partnership Forum is about a partnership that could change dramatically each country, and businesses coming together in a way that we never have before to influence what is really possible. Not just in terms of profits or trade, but really focus upon the benefits to society, innovation, education, entrepreneurism, and outcomes in a partnership way that I think will be a model for the rest of the world. So more optimistic than ever. People tease me about being the biggest bull in India. I am. I get in a very gentle way reminded that, John, you're our ambassador around the world, and it's an honor that I am that. And I believe in your country. I'm in love with your country, and I believe in your leadership. And I think the next 10 years for India is going to be an example for the rest of the world.
Well, it's always great to hear amazing things about your country, and it's nice to be in the spotlight. But John, I also want to understand that, are you seeing the increase in investments as well? Since the Modi government came to power, it's made no bones about it. It wants FDI, and how much ever FDI it gets, it's not enough. We did hear about $60 billion, unveiled yesterday by the government in Parliament. Are the American companies increasing their investments?
Well, the exciting part about what has occurred is, if you were to ask most American business leaders 3 years ago, are you bullish on India? They would have said it very quietly, but the answer would have been no. If you would have had a meeting, as Prime Minister Modi did, with 20 of the top American business leaders prior to the meeting with President Trump around the table, you wouldn't have got half of them, and the ones that were there would have been lukewarm in terms of the approach. Instead, all 20 had a chance to view and share with the Prime Minister their opportunities and their issues. Prime Minister went around the room and went afterwards talking about each one of them and summarized them, and every one of those 20 are investing in India. And so what you see is a business confidence about investing in India, and the same thing true, and it's very important, it's a win-win versus the U.S., a Indian confidence about investing in America, where you have a SpiceJet buying Boeing equipment, but also buying from a startup a different seating capability, etc. So this is where together we can do things between business and the citizens and governments that could not be done before, and it's why I'm so excited about today's topic.
So, like, for example, yesterday after the Apple earnings, Tim Cook said India is where China was a few years ago. Do you agree with that?
Well, remember that I was the first CEO who bet on China in 1995 in a big way, and the first CEO who bet on India in a big way in 1997 and put our second world headquarters. And well, what I do is I connect data points. I'm able to identify data points and be able to go A, B, Z. So they call it looking around corners. What I really do is I listen well and understand how the data points that I get, what the outcomes will be. It's why I could become so optimistic on your Prime Minister by just listening to his early thoughts and his processes. But I had an unfair advantage. I'd seen this movie before with the internet era with President Clinton. I'd seen this movie before in terms of Israel and France. And so I'm able to connect the dots, perhaps might be my biggest strength. I have lots of weaknesses. We'll talk about that another time.
Okay, we'll leave that for another interview. So when you connect these dots, what is it? Are we where China was of 3 years ago?
I think that you're moving faster. I think that if you look at it economically, You can do the math as quickly as I can. But what you're now starting to do is to see a national plan in India with the world's largest democracy and the strength of the world's largest democracy and the weakness suddenly move with speed, which has never occurred before in India's history. And there was always we were just close to breaking away, where now we clearly are on it. And with a partnership attitude and with a leader who's fearless. Truly fearless.
You know, and this is a leader who also redefined Indo-US relationships. We all know about the bonhomie that was there between Barack Obama and Narendra Modi. Do you think that is going to be as robust between Donald Trump and Narendra Modi?
Well, I think it's going to be even more. If you watch what was just outlined in the meeting between our two
So you think
leaders,
this is going to be a better relationship, a stronger relationship?
I think dramatically stronger. It's one thing to have a relationship between the two leaders. That is very important. But between two countries, and alignment of the businesses, the countries, the citizens toward a common win-win goal, that's what the strategic partnership is about. And it has to be one-to-one. You know, Cisco is the world's best at acquisitions. I did 180 of them. Chuck has done 16. On top of that, so we've done 196 with the highest hit rate in the world. We do strategic partnerships with Apple or with Ericsson that no one else has ever done. And with Apple, first time ever, Apple's ever partnered with somebody on joint engineering development. But it's one-to-one in terms of outlining vision and strategy and moving rapidly. So when you really talk strategic partnerships, it's a one-to-one relationship. And so I think the opportunity here is much more than existed before. Before there was a good relationship between the leaders, but there wasn't the breadth and depth of the implementation of that through the organizations. This time it looks really exciting. What you read about in the press, it was even better, is what I've heard.
But you know, we back home also have fears about the Trump administration's view when it comes to the US visas, whether it's the H-1Bs, etc. There is a view that maybe America is looking more inward than ever before, is getting more protectionist. Couldn't this turn out to be a thorn in relationships?
Well, I would look at it the other way. I think and even though I'm a moderate Republican, what President Clinton taught me early on, and I was on stage with him in the White House announcing the Internet Air, and I was scared to death. I'd just become CEO, and here's the president, the vice president, and I'm talking about the Internet Air, and it's the future of our country and jobs and everything. But he taught me many things, and one of the things he taught me is you always want to understand your partners. What are their strengths and what are their concerns and fears? For the first time in our history, America leaders, households believe their children ought to have a better life than their parents. We, unlike India, where you're now doubling your per capita income every 10 years and probably will every 7 if the Prime Minister's vision plays out the way that I think it will, you have to understand that American households have not had a raise on average for 17 years. And they're concerned about will their children have jobs and will they have jobs in the future. So as we make changes...
Or will those jobs be in Bangalore?
Or will the jobs be perhaps somewhere else?
Yes.
And so that's one of the benefits that a US-India Strategic Business Forum can address, is how do we show how this is a win-win? Take the SpiceJet example and really say, here's companies investing in America to create jobs there. Here are American companies investing in India to create jobs there. And done right, this will be far more jobs than either country could do by itself and far more income than either country can do by itself. And our businesses working together in a way that's never been done before is really our aspirational goal here. It really has unprecedented opportunity, but it's complex. And
but
you have to work
isn't it already happening? Sorry to interrupt you. For example, the Indian IT companies have already started hiring locally more in the United States.
Absolutely. And they've done a much better job of marketing that to people. And when you have a fear of losing your job and you have a fear your children won't do as well, you've got to have a vision on how this is beneficial to them. And so this is where I think that, again, the business group that we're forming will be able to focus in a way that other businesses have not about how is this a win-win for all involved. And backing that up with facts as well as the ability to sell a vision.
Because Indian groups are doing that. You've given the SpiceJet example. We had the Mahindras who were there, I think, about a fortnight back announcing an investment plan in the US. You have JSW led by Sajjan Jindal, which is talking of increasing its
Yes.
investments in the US. So it is happening.
It is happening, but you've also got to be able to add it up, as the Prime Minister did very effective in his meeting, to talk about the investments across 35 states and to talk about the job creation. And this is where you've got to really, as President Clinton taught me, outline what are the opportunities together, outline what are the concerns, and say, here's why it is a win-win for both sides, and then back it up with facts constantly on telling the story and communicating it.
The fear in India also is about job losses, because as these Indian IT companies go and hire more in the US, as it impacts their margins, etc., there's less outsourcing, it impacts, the kids back home in the country. So there is some resentment. I'm sure you read about that in the press as well.
Well, this is where I think that you can either look at the big picture and say, here's what's possible, and here's how both countries benefit, or you can take the exception and say, here's a concern. I tend to be always in the big picture. My parents are both doctors. They taught me very quickly to focus on the overall opportunity,
Get the root of the
underlying
problem.
issues.
Yeah.
Don't treat the symptoms, because the symptoms are not the issue. We have to generate 1.1 million jobs in India. We have to generate 200,000 jobs a month in the US. You can do both together much quicker than you can individually. So either you're a society that resists change and constantly kicks the issues down in the street, as you would say, or you say, we're going to be bold, we're going to dream what's possible, we're going to take this from a vision to execution, and here's why it's a benefit to all the citizens to move this way. I clearly believe in that path.
John Chambers, when you look at India's startup universe, what do you think it is that it can learn from the Bay Area, from the examples that you've seen in the United States?
Well, I think you can learn a lot. And what is fascinating is I talk to startups all over the world.
Yes.
I probably have 30 or 40 startup meetings a month now. And Cisco itself has invested $2.1 billion in startups. We bought 196 companies. I personally, my next chapter of my life will be all around startups, and they're kind of like being a grandparent. I get to go in and give them advice, and I get to help them with strategy. I've seen the movie before, and then I get to give it to management at the end of the evening. But you'll see, I will invest here in India as well.
In your personal capacity?
Absolutely.
Have you already started identifying?
I've already invested in one company, and when I come back in November, we'll talk about that in more areas. But that's leading by example. It's one thing to say, this is what I think the country ought to do. Do you do it as a company? Cisco clearly does. Do you do it as an individual? I clearly do in that aspect. I think startups where all job creation will occur, and we've got to move even faster given some of the challenges we'll face 3 to 5 years out. Startups create a fair amount of jobs today, but they really create the jobs 3 and 5 years out. So you've got to get that into your pipeline, into your funnel.
What I was also trying to get as the lessons that we could learn, because now, for example, if you see the Uber Travis Kalanick episode, I'm sure there are lessons from that to be learned in India as well, right?
Well, what is exciting is the lessons learned for startups are the same everywhere in the world. If you look at why companies are successful or CEOs successful, they're successful, number one, because they get market transitions right. They're successful, number two, because they don't stay doing the right thing too long. They really have the courage to change. They reinvent themselves. They stay close to their customers, their citizens, if you will. And when you think about a CEO's job, in successful companies, the CEO sets the vision and strategy for the company. They develop the leadership team to implement that vision and strategy. They set the culture, and they also communicate all of the above. Cisco's not a perfect company. I'm not a perfect leader. But our culture is what many people give us the reasons we've been successful. Remember our competitors from 15 years ago and on.
Where are they?
Competitors, great competitors, Lucent, Alcatel, Nortel, from 10 years ago, a shadow of what they've done. We get market transitions right, and our culture, while not perfect, it starts with make innovation happen. It starts with treat people like you'd like to be treated yourself. It starts with just do the right thing. And so while we'll make mistakes, I would argue that companies who have those type of cultures do well in the future.
But isn't that also one problem in India? That's one of the criticisms that we get. We don't innovate. We've never created an Apple or a Google, or we don't have a company that could be like that. Is something that Narendra Modi also talks about.
Well, I think that there have been certain areas where you've innovated very well. Your consultancy companies, I mean, these are the brand names in the world that have been amazing. But if you're really going to have a startup ecosystem, You've got to think about what are the key elements of that. How do you train your students differently at an earlier age? How do you use things like the Cisco digitization entrepreneurship programs that we're developing for 10 to 14-year-olds and that we will do across all the schools if your country decides to do it? How do you basically have venture capital groups that will help not only fund your organizations, but Cisco never used our venture capital money that the venture capital firm Sequoia gave us, but we used their expertise to help us on evolving our company and scaling, etc. So it's how do you get those ecosystems of opportunities? The fun thing is when I sit back and I listen to the startups in India, and I do regularly, and other than the accent, I think I'm in the middle of Silicon Valley. But what is also interesting, I'm sitting in Dubai, and other than the accent, I couldn't tell that those startups were from Jordan, Lebanon, Sweden, UAE, Syria. And so I think the world's future is about startups. I think India can not only be a good startup nation, which it is today, I think it can lead in the world in terms of the approach. I think the U.S. needs to do the same thing.
And would you blame brain drain, the fact that we don't have the best of educational facilities here? You're losing a lot of the people that could innovate and make some of the world's best startups going and pursuing what you call the American dream?
Well, he's a very good friend. And what I would agree with is that
we lose these kids early. They go abroad to study.
I'm from West Virginia, and I'm very proud to be from West Virginia. We lose a lot of our young, educated people outside the state. We've got to find a way to keep them. But you keep them by creating the jobs and the atmosphere and the excitement. Remember, I'm a product of Boston Route 128. It was, this circle around Boston was the high-tech center of the world just 3 decades ago. 1,000 high-tech companies. You know how many exist there today? 1. If you get market transitions wrong, you get left behind.
Boom.
So you have to have the courage to change. You have to say, how do you do things differently? You have to have the courage to outline a very ambitious vision, as your Prime Minister has, as I would argue Cisco has, and I would argue as the U.S.-India Strategic Partnership Forum is. And then you've got to be willing to go for it.
As I wind down the interview, I'm going to pick up on something you said at the start, which is that when the Prime Minister was in the U.S., he spoke to each American CEO one by one.
Yes.
And have things changed since then? I'm sure he got some feedback. Has that been implemented? What's the feedback?
I think what you're seeing, and this is where everybody wants things to move faster.
They're very impatient. We're guilty of that.
Yes, and that's true everywhere. But if you watch, the optimism of American companies has been amazing. And every CEO I've asked, would you want to become a part of this new vision in terms of the Strategic Partnership Forum, has said yes. And so I believe the optimism about the relationship with India on both sides continues to be very good. And when I talk this week, I always do what you do. I poll at the end. I said, well, how many of you actually believe?
Yeah. How many are going to put your money down on the table, right?
Exactly. And so when I asked that in France, out of the press, with 400 members of the press in the room with Macron there beside me, the economic minister, I said, how many of you believe France can become the startup engine in the world? I would have been ecstatic if 10% of the room raised their hand. 80% did. And when I talked, how many of you believe the U.S.-India strategic partnership can really make a difference in our countries and the average citizen? 80 to 90% of the room is raising their hand this week. So I'm still the bull on India. I believe your country has done amazing, but I don't think it's at the peak at all. I don't think you've seen anything yet. And I think our countries, by working together, of which I hope that I can be a part of, and the Strategic Partnership Forum can be as well, I think it increases the success rate.
John Chambers, always a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you, and we look forward to that interview when you come back in November.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/etnow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at etnowlive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/etnow.